Welcome to Future Squared, the podcast all about corporate innovation, entrepreneurship, and self-empowerment. Future Squared brings you a double dose of innovation inspiration every week to help you and your company stay relevant in an era of rapid change and 10x your results in both your professional and personal life. Each week, I'll bring you corporate innovators, entrepreneurs, authors, keynote speakers, and thought leaders such as Steve Blank, David Allen, Brad Feld, Tim Harford, Karen Dillon, Jenny Blake, Neil Patel, Rand Fishkin, Pascal Finette, Ryan Blair, and Ash Moria, to name just a few. While every Friday, I'll bring you Fast Fix Friday, some quick, digestible insights to help you end your week on a high as you head off for the weekend. Future Squared is brought to you by Collective Campus, an innovation hub school and consultancy based in Melbourne, Australia and Singapore that works with companies to help them adopt the mindset, methods and tools to navigate change and survive and thrive in an era of rapid disruption. If your organization needs help coming up with ideas, testing and turning ideas into reality, incubating teams, driving cultural change, or connecting and partnering with startups, then visit www.collectivecamp.us. And without further ado, here's today's podcast. Welcome back to Future Squared. Today I bring you Sean Ellis. He's the CEO and founder of growthhackers.com, the #1 online community built for growth hackers. He coined the term growth hacking in 2010 after using it to ignite growth for Dropbox, Eventbrite, LogMeIn, and Lookout, each now worth billions of dollars. Sean also founded and sold customer insights company Qualaroo, growing it to millions of dollars in recurring revenue with customers such as Uber, Starbucks, and Amazon. Sean is co-author of Hacking Growth, How Today's Fastest Growing Companies Drive Breakout Success. He regularly speaks to startups and Fortune 100s and has been featured in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Wired Magazine, Fast Company, Inc.com, and TechCrunch. So with that, I bring you the one and only Sean Ellis. Welcome to the show, Sean.
Thanks, Steve. Good to be here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. And I just learned in our little chit chat before recording that you were born in Sydney.
Yeah, born in Sydney, but left at a young age.
Yeah, now you find yourself over in the OC in California?
Yeah, I'm in Orange County now in Newport Beach, and kind of, I guess, sort of as close to Sydney climate as you could get.
Yeah, well, you've still got the pristine beaches over there, so that's kind of Sydney-esque in a way.
Right.
So, Sean, thanks for agreeing to appear on the show. I'm sure many of our listeners will be excited to learn something from this one. And I guess first up, as the person who coined the term growth hacker way back in 2010, and for the benefit of our audience, some of who may not really be familiar with the term, how do you define growth hacking?
Yeah, so for me, I coined the term because I had been a marketer for a lot of years and knew that growth went well beyond what marketing could do. So I was just trying to look at how do companies actually grow. And so growth hacking is about doing experimentation all the way along the customer journey and not just out in the marketing channels, and doing that experimentation to basically increase the value that you're delivering to customers, which is key to driving sustainable growth of customers and ultimately revenue.
Yeah, and it aligns quite closely with, I guess, the lean startup philosophy, where it is all about experiment-led customer discovery.
Right, very similar. And I think it's just really looking at it through the lens of sustainable growth is the main thing that you're focused on. But definitely, if you are a believer in lean startup, then this will probably make a lot of sense to you.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess for me, what gets me really excited about growth hacking is that it's not about having the biggest marketing budget per se, and that it can help people and startups of modest means with the right attitude, the right skill set to basically take their ideas to the world. As opposed to having to, fight for TV slots and above the line marketing campaigns like we used to, 10, 15 years ago. Today, you can leverage a third party's audience as long as you can find some form of mutually beneficial value.
Yeah, it's relentless optimization of kind of every part of that customer journey. So what that does is gives you a lot of leverage when you do want to spend money. You can spend it much more cost effectively than if you're than if you're a marketer who's just trying to bring them to the front door and relying on the rest of the team to drive those conversions. It's bringing that same approach all the way through, and makes it much easier to spend money if you want to, and ultimately can even help you drive growth without spending money in a lot of companies.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, you mentioned there it's more cost effective. And I guess what came to mind was your traditional sort of marketing officer role at a large company where you've got, say, a 6 month to 12 month marketing campaign all set up. You know what you're going to spend, you know what you're going to spend it on. And effectively, regardless of whether or not those channels are effective, you're spending that money regardless. Whereas with growth hacking, it says, okay, we're going to run this experiment. We might run it for a day, a week, a couple of weeks. We'll get some data, as much data as we need. And then based on that, we'll determine whether or not we're making money off this channel, whether or not we're getting some value, or whether or not we should just kill this and move to something else.
Absolutely. Yeah. The shelf life of tactics has gotten so much shorter, and the whole approach of kind of annual campaigns and trying to plan that out in advance just doesn't make sense anymore. There's new channels that are emerging literally every single week, and even within a channel, if you look at, especially in online channels, you look at something like Facebook, what works 1 month on Facebook is not going to work the next month, and so you have to constantly stay on top of these platforms. But it's not just about the channels for growth hacking. It's about really getting deep into that customer experience and figuring out ways where you build so much efficiency that you actually can compete in those channels that are changing really quickly. So it's really kind of all of the interdependent variables that work together to help you deliver value to customers and drive growth.
Yeah, perfect. And Sean, you were the first marketer at Dropbox, and one of the growth hacks I often talk about in the workshops we run here is how Dropbox got something like 75,000 signups literally overnight. Were you involved in that, or was this just before you joined the company?
Yeah, I joined the week that the company had a public launch. The big push that really got them on the map was pre-me, which was super cool. They basically were able to make a great video of the Dropbox experience before the product was even available, and get some pretty good distribution out on Dig. And once people saw what they were trying to do, it drove a lot more interest in the product. But I mean, I think ultimately the success of Dropbox, anybody can get someone potentially interested in the product, but if the product doesn't deliver on the expectations around just like ease of use and all of the other things that the simplicity of being able to keep your data synchronized between all your devices that Dropbox was able to achieve, is probably so much more impressive than just the growth hack that got people to check it out in the first place.
Yeah, and that particular growth hack, I mean, you mentioned the product wasn't available yet, but was it even functioning, or was it just kind of like a smoke and mirrors video that they put together?
Well, there was, I think, a couple of videos. The first one was kind of a smoke and mirrors video, and then they built a waiting list off of the second one. And I think just as with anything, they definitely subscribe to the lean startup approach of a minimum viable product. So there was definitely a product there all the way along, but it was a product that wasn't ready to roll out to everybody at the same time.
Yeah, and the important thing there was that they actually found communities online that would resonate, that the product would resonate with, which was Dig and Reddit, and they didn't just blindly blast some random channel where they were just hoping that enough people would see it, that the right people would see it.
Right. They definitely were creative in getting it to go viral on Dig, which it got that seed going, so that by the time that I got there, we had a nice solid base of early adopters on the product, and then it was really how do we leverage those early adopters to ultimately move it to much more of a mainstream customer base. And in the 6 months, I did it as an interim VP marketing role, and in the 6 months when I was there, I was surveying all the way along, and I asked a question: which best describes you? I like to be among the first to try cool new technology, or I only try things that I think will be useful for me.
Yeah.
And when I started, it was 80% of the user base was saying they like to be among the first to try cool new technology. But within 6 months, we'd flipped it to where it was 80% of the user base saying that they only try things that they think will be useful for them.
Oh, wow. How important was it to do that type of early stage customer persona, those interviews?
It was huge for me. So
Mm,
I basically, I ran, I, I must have done hundreds of surveys,
yeah.
just trying to figure out the user base, trying to figure out what they loved about the product, what their expectations were as they were coming in. And a lot of it was basically to define, to really try to capture the essence of what was driving all of that customer passion
Hmm.
from that early base of users, and then make sure that we carefully articulated that for new users signing up, and then streamlined the delivery of that value, and kind of honed it based on what their intent was. So, if somebody was coming in on a file share, they had a very different expectation of what the product was going to do compared to if they came in via word of mouth on the homepage, and which was generally emphasizing keeping your own data synchronized across multiple devices. So
Mm.
it really, like, kind of getting into their heads, figuring out what their expectations were, making sure that we didn't tell them everything the product could do right away, because then it would be overwhelming them with complexity. So trying to convert that initial intent, but knowing that the goal was to ultimately bring them to the experience that they would understand the product holistically.
Yeah, and you touched on an interesting point there around depending on where they came from, whether it was through file share or whether it was through the homepage, the message they would see would effectively be different and more in line with what that person was valuing.
Right. Yes, intent is such a valuable kind of asset to be working with as a
Mm,
marketer, that if you don't try to completely understand and harness that intent, you're probably going to lose it, and then you have to try to do demand gen, and that's a lot harder. So if there's some existing demand that is interested in the product, it's all about breaking down the barriers to satisfy that demand.
yeah, yeah, and it reminds me of an A/B test that a lot of startups I know are tinkering with, which is you run a particular well, you'll A/B test say several different variations of a landing page, but based on where you're running your ads and based on what the customer segment is on that particular ad you're running, they'll all see different landing pages. So
Yep.
one, yeah, and one could be male 18 to 25, the other could be female 35 to 45, and branding, everything can be different just so it resonates with that particular customer segment.
Yeah, I think the key, though, that I see a lot of people doing that, but the mistake that I see is that they then have very fragmented messaging long term,
Hmm.
and the product means so much for different people, where it's really important to understand that core most valuable experience, and everything else is just sort of a pathway to get them to that most valuable experience, and then trying to reinforce kind of a primary promise about that experience to the majority of people, unless they have a very different intent that you're trying to kind of
Yeah.
direct into the product. But it's basically a lot of qualitative research, and then a lot of A/B testing to figure out how to maximize results based on that qualitative research.
Yeah, exactly. And it is something that I think you touched on it there, which is, you do that in the early stages when you're trying to do all your qualitative and quantitative research and figure out who your customers are, why the product resonates with them. But once you've got them on board, it really is, what's your main product? Because if you can't be concurrently for the life of the product running 20 or 30 different marketing messages at the same time, it would be very onerous on the marketing team.
Yeah, yeah, but it's a balancing act, though, because it's definitely, I think you can support multiple intents, but
Hmm.
the you have to quickly kind of convert that intent into a more consistent promise of what the product does, or
Yeah.
you'll have a pretty fragmented brand.
Excellent, excellent. So we touched on your traditional marketing teams earlier and your 6 to 12 month sort of marketing campaigns. Um, would you say that the VP of marketing, as Andrew Chen calls it, is that something that you see replacing your traditional CMO in the future, or perhaps complementary to your traditional marketing roles at large companies?
So what I see happening is a transition where the old siloed organization,
Hmm.
where you have marketing that's primarily kind of somewhat bringing new customers to the front door, and then you've got a product team that's going through the onboarding and the ongoing product experience. Uh, that that approach is just not very effective,
Mm.
and what you're seeing is companies like Facebook that from the time they introduced a cross-functional growth team almost 10 years ago now, it was 9 years ago they did it, they have added another 400 billion
Wow.
in valuation to the business. And it's just, once you have a common success metric, so in growth hacking, we refer to something called a North Star metric.
Mm-hmm. And
that North Star metric is really this expansion of value across your user base. That becomes something that is really a rallying metric for every department within the business, for everyone to be able to evaluate how am I impacting this North Star metric, this expansion of value. And I think increasingly what you find is when that happens, a cross-functional growth team that's able to experiment across each of the areas of the customer journey is what works best for moving that North Star metric in the right direction. So you might still have, I think, I was going to say Uber's a good example, but they're kind of a messed up company these days. But I think they still, like, you have at companies like Uber and Facebook, the marketing function still exists, but it's more tangential to this core growth team.
Mm-hmm.
It actually sits within the growth team at Uber. I'm not sure where it sits at Facebook, but I think that the real value in customer acquisition and retention and conversion is happening in this cross-functional growth team, and maybe brand awareness and some of the pieces a marketing function is still important for, but especially in an early stage company just can't even think about brand awareness. It has to be very ROI focused, get people to an experience, monetize and retain those people. And so I think that's really the angle that probably Andrew was talking about when he said that it's the new VP of marketing is the growth hacker.
Yeah.
But as companies are more mature, there are needs for some more traditional marketing there.
Yeah. Well, yeah. As any startup gets bigger and bigger, they need to put more processes in place and just execute. But that can often be the death of innovation in a lot of startups as they get bigger. But that's another story, and we won't digress.
Yep.
But on the North Star metric, Sean, I guess that kind of aligns with what we hear from guys like Ben Yoskovich rather, who wrote the one metric that matters, or Gary Keller.
It's synonymous with the idea of the one metric that matters, but it's basically that. I think the problem with the one metric that matters is that I used to refer to it as that, but then everybody quickly goes into, but this metric's important, and this metric's, that it immediately puts people on their heels.
Yeah.
Versus a North Star metric that has a bunch of sub metrics that are levers for moving that North Star metric. I think is a kind of a clearer way to describe it.
Yeah. Well, that's funny, because the next thing I wanted to talk about was focusing on one metric at the risk of everything else, which I had a conversation with Ash Moria recently, and he was saying, oh, well, if you just focus on the one metric that quote unquote matters, then you might be doing so at the detriment to another part of the business. For example, if you're Airbnb and you're focusing on nights booked, but the experience is poor, then that's not going to be sustainable in the long term, because people aren't going to come back. But what you've said there is you've got your North Star metric, but you've still got all these other sub metrics that you're tracking as well. It's not just that single metric.
Right. So nights booked is a classic one from Airbnb. Like that's going to be comprised of new customers and repeat customers. And so you need to focus on both of those. If you're only focused on the repeat, you're not going to have that much room for growth. But if you're only focused on the new, then you're probably going to sacrifice quality, and they're not going to be coming back. So that would be an example of a couple of sub metrics that feed into that main North Star metric.
Yeah, excellent. And on large companies, I suppose, embracing growth hacking. I mean, I'm seeing more companies, the likes of Deloitte and IBM, talk about growth hacking. And I mean, to me, it seems as if growth hacking was born out of necessity, came out of startups who didn't have all that much cash, desperation, and had to find novel ways to grow short of spending money on big marketing campaigns. I mean, what's your take on large organizations really getting growth hacking and applying it successfully?
I think so much of growth hacking is about breaking down some of those traditional silos that that's probably the hardest type of change for a large company to make. Those are like entrenched 100-year-old or
Mm.
longer silos, and to start to tell people that they have a common metric and they need to work together to understand how to move that metric. I, I just think that it's hard, but
Yeah.
it's something that when you look at an Amazon versus a Walmart and see that, Walmart was the most or one of the most valuable companies in the world not very long ago. Amazon
Mm.
just hit their market cap, kind of tied them maybe a year ago and doubled them this year. And it's you just see so much growth. And then same thing with Airbnb versus some of these historic hotel chains that it's now worth more than them. Like it's something that they have to take notice. Even Tesla's is a great example of a company that is some of the referral programs, some of the fact that they have $400,000 people that have pre-ordered, put $1,000 down on a
Yeah.
pre-ordering a car that's still probably a year from being delivered. And I'm one of them that
Hmm.
ordered it a year and a half ago. It's um, it I, like I think that there's a lot to be learned from these companies, and so even the older companies that might have a harder time adopting growth hacking, they're they're realizing the necessity of it because they compete against these companies, and if the agility that growth hacking brings to these companies helps them outcompete the entrenched player, then these entrenched companies need to respond, and I think they're trying to. Like L'Oreal, for example, I kicked off a growth hacking week with pretty much all of their country managers, or their main country managers from around the world, came to California a few months ago, and for a week, all of them studied growth hacking in Southern California and in Silicon Valley.
Mm.
So I think they're trying to figure it out. They're trying to see where it applies, and especially with a company like L'Oreal, where you've got channels and you don't have
Mm.
that direct customer relationship as much. Might be a little tougher, but then you see a Unilever acquiring Dollar Shave Club for the channel that it brings to them to be able to do growth hacking on a more of a direct customer acquisition and retention approach. So
Yeah.
I think there's potential if these companies get creative enough to be able to apply it in just about any type of business.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, you mentioned Tesla and Amazon there, and obviously they're your modern big companies, and L'Oreal is probably one of the more traditional ones. And I guess, what would be the challenge is not so much, learning growth hacking is definitely one thing, but then how do you effectively apply that in what is a very, like you said, siloed organization with particular structures that don't really lend themselves to experimentation? I think we saw GE do something. Well, GE did do something a few years ago with Eric Ries, where he taught thousands of middle managers the lean startup philosophy. But once they got back to their business units, taking risks, experimenting, moving quickly, it just wasn't possible until they redesigned some of the processes and systems at those
Hmm.
business units that would help them actually move faster and try lots of different things.
Yeah, no, it's definitely. I don't think anybody should take it too lightly. The challenge, especially in an older organization, to do it. But one of the companies that I've actually been most impressed, that's
Hmm.
a long established company, is Adobe, and what they've done is they basically have a startup within Adobe where they've organized it like any other Silicon Valley startup, and it's their Adobe Spark unit, and they are, I would say, among the most sophisticated growth teams with a growth process that I've seen of any company, and they just happen to be in a much larger established software company.
Yeah. Is the Spark team responsible for the Kickbox program? Are you familiar with that?
Not familiar with that. I know
Okay.
it's a product called Spark,
Okay. Cool.
but yeah, I mean, I was really impressed with how they've been approaching it. We actually had the guy who runs their growth team speak at our Growth Hackers conference in LA a couple of weeks ago, and
Mm.
just everything he laid out was super impressive.
Yeah, well, they've also, I mentioned the program they've got called Kickbox, where basically any employee at Adobe who has an idea basically just raises their hand. They get a little red box called the Kickbox, and it will have some instructions in there around how you, map out a lean canvas, first, map out your key assumptions, what tests you can do, or what prototypes you can build to run some tests and get some data. And it also comes with a little credit card loaded with $1,000 on it. So you can actually go out and spend money on whatever you need to make these prototypes a reality, get some data, and then take that data back to a decision maker and say, hey, this was my idea. This is what I did. Here's the data. What do you think?
What's the name of that?
Kickbox.
Kickbox.
Yeah, really, really cool. And I think once they validate their assumptions with the Kickbox, then they get another blue box, which I'm not sure what's in that one. They've kept that one pretty hush over at Adobe. But
like a black box.
yeah, yeah. So just to I'll digress for a second. On your Tesla, Sean, are you Model X, Model S, or a Model 3 guy?
No, I pre-ordered the Model 3.
Yeah.
Mostly, I drive like an old Jeep as my normal car, and I'm not really a modern kind of car driver, but I love the autonomous stuff that is so close with Tesla that's the autonomous driving stuff is what I'm really excited about.
Yeah, I actually put my name down as well a few months ago, but being in Australia, we don't get ours till something like early 2019, so I've got a bit of time.
I was like 300,000th on the list or something, but then I wasn't going to do it. I was like, oh, geez, it'll be forever before I get one. And then I saw West Coast, United States first. I'll jump pretty far ahead on the list for that.
Yeah, nice one. Awesome, man. So one of my former colleagues, he wrote an article about his marketing degree. And his marketing degree, he learned all sorts of above the line 1980s stuff. And he basically complained that, well, it wasn't a complaint, but he basically observed that once he got into the real world and started working for an agency, nothing that he learned was applicable. He had to learn everything from scratch. And you know what? This is true of a lot of professions, but it was as if he didn't need to go to that course for a single day. And I mean, what do you make of today's university degrees versus, say, your more modular online education when it comes to marketing, when it comes to growth hacking, and so on?
Yeah, I mean, I look at it as an advantage that I didn't study marketing in college. I studied more microeconomics, which I think applies to a lot of what I do day to day. But interestingly, once I got my first marketing role and actually, I think I'd already been promoted to a VP of marketing. It was a public company at that point. Without really ever studying marketing, then I thought, geez, I better get some real marketing kind of training. So I went and took a strategic marketing management course at NYU, and it caused me to way overthink things and actually kind of threw my game off for a few months until I could kind of like stop, get out of the book, and just keep using logic where it's You acquire a customer, you keep that customer, you maximize revenue per customer. The more revenue you generate, the more you can spend on acquiring more customers. It was interestingly, for that company, we went on to have the lowest customer acquisition cost of any publicly traded company. That company became the number 8 website in the world in terms of total usage time, and it was everything that I did was the opposite of what I was learning from a book.
It's funny you mentioned that, and you said you're better off not having that marketing base, and that makes you that's your advantage. And this is a unrelated but related in some way. I know a lot of UFC coaches basically say that some of their best fighters are guys that didn't come into mixed martial arts with a particular discipline. For example, they weren't BJJ guys or Muay Thai guys or boxing guys. They started training MMA from a young age so they could throw it all together rather than lean towards a particular discipline when they're in the octagon.
Yeah. I think my advantage when I started doing this, it was 1996 when I started doing it. And so there was no book on how to market on the internet in 1996 and no class on it really. So for me, having kind of a blank slate, I'd also invested really every dollar I had into the business. So I was really focused on trying to make it successful. And so I could really think like, how should a company grow in this new emerging medium? And I wasn't trying to impress my boss with what I was doing. I was trying to make sure the business stayed in business, and because I had done that investment. So I think that was sort of the right mindset going into it, and could really invent as we went along. And that was, sometimes it's easier to invent when you don't have stuff to forget.
Yeah, that's a great one. And you mentioned there because you had that investment, you were committed to finding ways to grow, which I think is so powerful. And again, comes back to the whole startup versus corporate growth hacking sort of mindset, where you basically
Right.
had to find ways to grow because every single dollar you had was invested into it.
Yeah, desperation is a pretty powerful motivator of being creative.
Yeah, it definitely is. Definitely is. And on being creative, Sean, you recently published Hacking Growth, your book on growth hacking, how today's fastest growing companies drive breakout success. It came out, what, about a month ago now. What can our readers expect to learn by picking up a copy of the book?
Yeah, so what we wanted to do was really kind of distill myself and my co-author just wanted to distill everything down into a pretty actionable process of how to build a growth team, how to make sure that you've got a product that actually can support sustainable growth, and how to go through and validate that,
Hmm.
and then just the process that a growth team needs to follow to effectively grow that North Star metric that I talked about earlier, and building a growth model of the interdependent levers that move that North Star metric forward. And
Hmm.
then, so that's kind of a lot of the beginning is just laying all of those pieces out with some good stories about just, some companies where I didn't do this at first and then kind of learned this on the fly, and some other companies where we talked to other heads of growth and founders. And then in the second part of the book, we get really tactical around just hacking acquisition and hacking activation, just
Hmm.
kind of everything in these key levers from retention and monetization, and just keeping that virtuous cycle where you can, an improvement in one area starts to make another area work better and loosens it up. And it's I so far the feedback's been awesome. I think we've got a 4.9 rating on Amazon,
Awesome.
and yeah, there's been a lot of enthusiasm around the book. So I'm glad that there's finally a kind of guidebook for doing these things.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess that complements growthhackers.com, the online, shall we call that, treasure trove of growth hacks that you're a founder of. You founded this, when was it, 2012? Or am I mistaken?
Yeah, so we launched the site in 2013,
Yeah.
but did it kind of as a side project from the business I was running at the time. And
Hmm.
we saw enough potential on growthhackers.com where we sold the other business about a year ago, and went all in, where we just have this great platform between now the book really kind of feeds into that platform, but
Mm.
book, conference, the community, and we've basically built training programs on top of that, and our big bet is on software for helping these cross-functional teams work
Yeah.
together to manage growth. And that's where most of our time and focus is, on building this software, and really starting to grow the user base on the software.
Awesome. Yeah, no, look, I'm a massive fan of growthhackers.com, and all of our audience should check it out if they're looking for a treasure trove of growth hacks. And I guess the one thing that I struggle with on growthhackers.com, Sean, is that there's just way too many growth hacks to choose from. So, I search for B2B growth hack, and I literally get hundreds of pages of hacks, and it's like, where do I start? So, on that, do you have any advice?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a couple of different ways to use it. Like you said, you can search, and then everything. The whole site is community run and
Mm.
and curated. So it's really this whole community of hundreds of thousands of monthly users going out and scouring the web for any useful content about
Mm.
how to grow businesses. They're all going in and submitting it, voting it up, commenting on the good stuff. And so, I mean, I think if you want like new emerging stuff, just going to the homepage and seeing what's trending at any given point, like the one or two top spots are usually pretty good.
Yeah.
And then we have a weekly newsletter where we cover kind of the top 10 trending articles of the week. But then the other way to use it, as you said, is just through search, being able to search basically any topic, and you can find a lot of depth in content around those. But again, it's just look for the ones that have the most votes and conversations on them, and there's probably pretty good content on
Mm.
that.
Excellent advice. We'll share that in the show notes for our listeners. Awesome, Sean. You've left our audience with a ton of value bombs. But before we wrap up today, we've got to throw you into our 3-question lightning round. Are you ready to rock and roll?
I hope so.
All right, let's do this. So, question number 1, Sean. if you could work for any organization at any stage of the company life cycle, so we could go back to the 18th century if we wanted to, who would it be and why?
So it would be my organization where I am right now. That's why I'm here. But that's too easy of an answer. So it would actually be Facebook. I think Facebook has. It would be Facebook, whether it's today or 5 years ago. They have the. They're so sophisticated in how they approach growth that I would love to just go there and learn.
Oh, and that's what it's all about, learning. Great answer. Question number 2, Sean, is if you could ask anyone a question, dead or alive, who would it be and what would you ask?
I would probably ask Alex Schultz, the guy who runs growth at Facebook. Just
seeing a theme here.
Yeah, no, anything that you can read that those guys have published or watch from any of those guys is probably going to be loaded with gold. But I would just ask him of everything that they've done. What is the most important, like, just tip that he would have around growth, whether that's process, but it definitely wouldn't be a tactic. It would be something to do with, and my guess is that he would probably emphasize North Star metric.
Excellent. And is there, speaking of one tip, is there one big tip you would give our audience on growth hacking?
Yeah, it would be North Star metric. Just like figure out a metric that quantifies the value you're delivering to your customers, and key everything that you're doing off of expanding that value. That's what drives retained growth. That's what drives referrals. Everything is really off of delivering value to customers.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And lucky last, Sean, I always try to get inside the heads of high performers to figure out how they stay on top of their game. So to that point, do you have any daily rituals or routines you partake in?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that I do every day is read our Net Promoter Score feedback. It's there's so much that I could learn about different channels and other things. That really being able to read from my customers why they would recommend our service, the main benefit that they're getting, or what we should be doing to improve it. So I think just keeps me plugged into what's really important, and that's really the relationship between how my product satisfies customers and getting that feedback keeps me plugged into what's probably the most important.
Perfect. And that brings us full circle back to building that sustainable growth.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Awesome. Well, our audience can connect with you on Twitter at Sean Ellis. That's ELLIS. They can head over to growthhackers.com and they can pick up a copy of Hacking Growth over on Amazon. Is there anywhere else people should go to find out more about you and connect, Sean?
Welcome to send a LinkedIn invite to me. I like to connect with other people that are interested in this stuff. But yeah, growthhackers.com and Twitter are probably the two best places to connect with me.
Awesome. Fantastic. So thanks for your time, Sean. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate it.
Hey guys, it's Steve again. If you're picking up what we're putting down, we'd love it if you took just a minute of your time to like, share, or subscribe to Future Squared on iTunes, SoundCloud, or Stitcher. It would mean a hell of a lot to the team here who work effortlessly to bring you thought leaders and experts on topics of corporate innovation, entrepreneurship, and self-improvement on a weekly basis. As always, you can find more resources on innovation, including blogs, books, podcasts, videos, webinars, and tools at www.collectivecamp.us. If you'd like to connect with me on Twitter, you can do so at Steve Glaveski. That's Glaveski. Until next time, keep innovating. Future Squared out.